Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Doug Hendrickson with me. Doug is a longtime sports agent and current executive vice president at Wasserman Sports Agency. And one thing I think you're going to hear in his story is if you treat people well and you really care about them, you can really cultivate phenomenal relationships. So, Doug, thanks so much for being on today.
Appreciate it, Phil. Big fan of your show and looking forward to our time.
Absolutely. Well, to start off, growing up, you had some cousins that happened to play in the NFL. So talk a little bit about, that as a younger age and just being exposed to some of the behind the scenes that you got to see.
Yeah, so starting out, I was a normal kid, basketball, baseball, hoop player, baseball player, and but my cousins played in the NFL for the 49ers. My mom's three other uncles or brothers played, Minneapolis Lakers and pro baseball and whatnot. So I kind of grew up in the sports world, and then was always around it. Was around the athletes growing up. I was Niner parking lot with Ronnie Lott and Joe Montana as a middle school kid with my cousins, and then went to San Jose State to play baseball and basketball, and then it kind of evolved after that. So but I grew up in the sports world for sure, and obviously loved it, and I didn't know anything else besides sports.
Yeah. Now, as you were playing in college, I always think there's an element that anytime you're playing collegiate athletics, especially at the Division I level, there's that aspiration of pro. But you also saw a potential career in sports agency. So talk a little bit about, that time in life for you and, kind of the battling of I'd like to go pro, but I also see this other avenue that if I can't go pro, that I could still be, attached to sports long term.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I never really thought about going pro, but back then there wasn't like it is now where there's all these different fields in sports.
Right.
So, back then no one really knew what agents did.
Yeah.
It was like there was agents, but the agents for like my cousins, they would do a contract, they might come to a game, they might send them a Christmas card, and that was it. There was no marketing, social media,
Yeah.
philanthropy, anything going on with these guys' lives other than just that simple transactional relationship.
Yeah.
And so I never really knew what this business was, but I always knew I wanted to be in sports to some degree. And I was always kind of a sales guy. I was a grinder. In college, I was the West Coast rep of college colored condoms, and I
Okay.
sold these condoms. To San Jose State and Davis and Cal and Stanford. So I was always trying to think outside the box and
Yeah.
connect the dots, and I was a sales guy. And so then in my senior year, I was playing baseball and basketball, and I would made these shirts up for the last San Jose State Fresno State football game, and I ended up paying like 25 grand for these shirts. Thinking, what am I going to do? End up selling them. It was the last game ever for this rivalry, and end up making like 50 grand.
Wow.
And so from there, it wasn't like a big budget school like Michigan or UCLA or, Alabama. And so I ended up selling like T-shirts and stuff to all the sports teams, making 2, 3, 4 grand a month in college.
Yeah.
And then at the end of my year, my old roommate Johnny Johnson said, "Hey man, I think you'd be a great agent.
Yeah.
Why don't you come work with me when you're done with school?" And still didn't know what this thing was about because no one you didn't know any agents back then.
Yeah.
And so got done, took the agent test. I think it was $200 back then, 1992, 93, and became an agent for my best friend and roommate. But while I'm doing that, I'm also still doing all now I've cultivated relationships with Hewlett Packard and Cisco and Intel, selling T-shirts and backpacks and mugs and whatnot to supplement my income as I was a struggling agent. So got in early back then doing that, and here I am 30 years later. So the grind was real. These
Yeah.
young kids always tell me today, like, man, you don't know what it's like. I said, no, I know what it's like. I know what it's like.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make money for 8 years. I know what it's like. And I had a side hustle and a side job that I started and created. So I know what this is all about. But back then, no one the business then was different than it is now.
Yeah.
And so, but I've always kind of wanted to be in the sports world and luckily got in and found my passion.
Yeah. Now, to talk to that point, someone listening right now is contemplating a career change, right? They're saying, I'm doing something that I'm not super passionate about, but I don't know if I can take the financial leap. And so to your point, you started doing something that you probably saw as potential career, but you had another way of having, revenue coming through the door to buy you time, right? So talk a little bit about that for someone that's, they're at a 9 to 5 job and they're thinking about leaving it to go do real estate or something that has, a variable income source for them. And they're just a little bit nervous about that.
Yeah, I would say, look, and Phil, and you know this too. In life, most people in life they work to live. You got to pay the bills, you got to pay the
Yeah.
mortgage, you have a car payment, you have kids, and most people do not like doing what they do.
Yeah.
Very few people are fortunate to live to work. I've always lived to work because I love what I do. I truthfully don't even know how much money I make. I make a lot of money, but I don't really know how much I make because I love doing what I do, and I wouldn't do anything else. So I tell the young kids now, I said, listen, if this is your passion, sports is not going away. It's only rising in
Yeah.
terms of this business through COVID, through different things. It's never going to go away. And so if you want to be in this thing, you got to sacrifice and you got to grind. This is not the software business where you get in on a Friday and then 3 weeks later you're getting promoted to make 150 grand.
Yeah.
You got to really grind and figure out some stuff if you can't get a job with a big agency. Like we hire a lot of people, but most agencies are not a big firm. There's us, there's CAA, there's WME, there's Athletes First, but most of them are mom and pop. So if that's the case, you got to find the side hustle and you got to grind and show what you're all about. But those are also stories you can tell on the recruiting trail too. Like, listen, I didn't make money for 8 years. I'm working 12 hours a day, schlepping t-shirts and mugs and pens while I'm out here recruiting. This is what
Yeah.
I want to do. And it just kind of shows the grind and the commitment, the hustle. And for me as the head of the firm now, when I have young kids come to me and want jobs, I want to know that they're willing to sacrifice and grind and battle. And
Yep.
so I would just tell people, listen, you got to love what you do. And if you love what you do, then you sacrifice along the way and the money will come.
Yeah, I love that. Now, for you, you mentioned, all right, the first client happened to be probably a little bit easier than what a lot of other people's, first client comes to be, but one client is not a sufficient amount of business. There has to be other growth. So talk about those, early years, those first 8 years, and just cultivating the relationships and putting feelers out and doing all the work, and sometimes not even getting the reward at the end of it, right?
Well, you're right. And the first one, I don't even consider that really a me getting him because that was my roommate and best friend.
Yeah,
But back then, remember, there was no cell phones back then in the early
right.
90s. There was no email. That you had a pager and you had a landline phone that you'd have to try to get somebody's number to call them to get a hold of them.
Yeah,
So recruiting back then was totally different. You don't DM somebody. You don't back then you had to literally work for it. So I'll never forget 1994, probably my first real client. I'm on the road. I flew to Atlanta and I'm going to colleges. And back then I just went to the school. I would go to Georgia. I would go to Alabama and I would show up on campus and try to find players and say, oh, I think that's so and so. And I'd go meet them or I'd go to the fraternity house, whatever it may be.
yeah,
So I'll never forget in 1995, I'm in Ohio, and somehow I talked to this scout from the Bears, and he was a young guy like me, kind of starting out, and I was starting out. He said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm in Cincinnati," and he's like, "You got to go meet this guy named Sam Garnes." And I said, "Who's Sam?" He's like, "He's a safety. He's probably going to be a mid-round pick, but the guy's a stud." So I go to campus, and I'm waiting there for 3 hours on campus. I'm asking every football player, "Hey, where is Sam Garnes?" And they said, I don't know, but I think he'll be out here soon. So an hour later, Sam shows up in the student union at Cincinnati. I meet him. He's like, "Who are you?" And I said, I'm a young agent from California. He says, "You came all the way out here to see me?" I said, "Yes, I did." Now, I really didn't, but of course I
right.
said I did. And he said, "Hey, after practice, come to my apartment." So after practice, go to his apartment. We meet. I got nothing to sell. It's me. I got one client in my room, and I got nothing to sell. But he likes me. He's like, "You know what? I like what you're all about. I love your hustle, love your grind. I want a young agent." And then he told me, I never forget, he said, "Listen, at the end of the season, you're my guy." This was like probably September, October.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Okay, come on, man. Like, really?" And then sure enough, end of the season, November, December rolled around. He called me. He says, "You ready to go?" I said, "Yes, I am." And that was kind of my first client, really, per se. But those early years, Phil, it was not easy, man. You had to go out there and just show up.
Yep.
And Justin Tuck, another client of mine,
Yeah.
I showed up at Notre Dame. I just pulled up to the dorm. I sat there for 2 days waiting for Justin Tuck because that's how it was back then. But I kind of miss those days because you miss the that hustle and whatnot. But yeah, early on when you after the first one, it was a grind, kept going and getting these guys because the communication was not easy like it is now.
Yeah. So there's two things I want to highlight in that. One, you mentioned Justin Tuck. So not only did you show up to Notre Dame, but then you also went to Alabama to meet with his family. So talk a little bit about that story and showed up to Alabama. And, once again, you're entering someone's house and you kind of got to sell yourself.
Yeah, 100%. Like I met with Justin, we had a great relationship, and he was leaning towards me, but he says, "Listen, you got to come meet the family." And he's like, "I'm from Kellyton, Alabama, which they call it Tuckville, and every house up there is all Tucks." Okay, and Justin was an imposing guy, big guy, stud player, the whole deal. So I get up there, it's like mid-December, and I go to the house, and there's probably 20 of them. Okay, uncles and grandma and grandpa and cousins and whatnot. And I go to the presentation, so I'm ready for a dog and pony show, and I got things prepared and whatnot. And they're all sitting there, no one's saying a word, like no one's talking. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not going well. And then at the end of the meeting, they said, all right, listen. I go, what's your timeline? And they said, well, we're going to meet about it, pray about it, and we'll let you know. And I knew right then and there, if I got on a plane, if I left Alabama to Atlanta and flew home, I'm probably not getting the kid. So I got one opportunity here to figure this thing out. So I'll never forget. They said, we're going to pray about it. I said, well, why don't we pray together? And literally, they looked at me like I was crazy. And we had a small prayer. And they said, hold on. And I go back out. They said, wait outside for me. And I go outside. And then they come out and said, you're the guy. And
Wow.
I'm like, great. So it could have gone bad. It could have
Yeah.
gone either way in that one. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But these are fun stories that I'll never forget that are really kind of cool. And every player is different in terms of how you get them and the relationship and whatnot. But Tuck to this day is now VP at Goldman Sachs doing some incredible things in the finance business. So it was a really important get for me to have him, and it was a fun story.
Absolutely. Now, in addition, to the Sam story, you talk about that sense of trustworthiness and loyalty. And I think, unfortunately, your industry has a little bit of a black eye in that of, people can say one thing, but then, hey, yeah, you're my guy when it comes to, draft time. And then I'm sure you probably have a few stories of times where that seemed to be like the path, and then all of a sudden you feel like the rug's pulled out from underneath you, and you're like, what was all the talk about? I'm the guy, and it changes. And so, talk a little bit about that and growing the trust and the respect with someone, because I think once again, unfortunately, that isn't the case for every situation.
No doubt. Well, I always put myself in a situation, or if someone's trying to sell me something or come in and to do something for me, and these guys, look, you're trying to trust somebody from a different time zone, a different culture, or whatever it may
Yeah.
be, and it's tough. And I'll never forget when I signed Marshawn Lynch in 2007. He looked at me and said, "Listen, man, don't come at me crooked. I've never trusted a white guy. I don't know why I'm trusting you, but don't ever come at me sideways or crooked in
Yeah.
our relationship." And it really dawned on me that I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Don't shoot me straight. Be honest with me. Don't bullshit me." And so I've always lived kind of my career that way because good, bad, and different, you got to come at these guys straight. This business is, I hate to say it, but it's a bunch of bad people on the agent side and on the financial side.
Yep.
And it's very hard to find people in it for the right reasons. A lot of it's transactional. And I've always believed as an agent, if you're in this thing and you're helping develop them and grow them and guide them and educate them, then you're doing your job. I don't need to be their best friend. These guys are yes, they're my boss. I work for them, but you got to have a partnership and kind of a CEO atmosphere where he's the CEO, but you have a board of directors and all that. But you got to be honest and forthright with him. And I've always said that if I work my butt off for him, if I add value, and if I do the right thing, I'm going to keep him as clients. But I don't need these guys to be my best friends. They don't need me to be their best friend. If that's the case, it's never going to work.
Yep.
And so I've always tried to be straight up and really honest with them about everything because You have to be. These guys are coming in a lot of money early on, and they have a lot of outside influences. And if you don't protect them and guide them, then you're not going to end up with the Justin Tucks down the road. You're not going to end up with Marshawn Lynch.
Yep.
And there's so many players now that are done playing ball going, what do I do now? What happens now? Or I have no money left. I don't know where things are at. Or they're not educated on different things in terms of financial literacy. And that's what I hate about this business. And that's what I've always tried to solve across the landscape of the industry.
I love that. Now you mentioned Marshawn, and going about bringing on Marshawn as a client. Fun story you have is a Snoop concert. So talk a little about having some tickets, inviting him to the concert, and the way the rest of it played out.
Yeah. So again, back then, and now luckily in 2006, we did have cell phones, but
Yeah.
I cold called Marshawn. I had a lot of Cal guys at the time, but I cold called Marshawn and I said, look, man, I'd love to get together. And he knew, I think he knew a little bit about me or maybe he didn't, I don't know. But I said, listen, do you want to come to the Snoop show on Wednesday? And he said, where? I said, San Francisco. He's like, okay, cool. And I said, he's a good friend of mine. I've known Snoop since I represented Jamal Anderson, the Dirty Bird in Atlanta. So I've known him for a long time. And I said, why don't you come to the show and all that? So, Marshawn shows up, of course, late with like 12 people. And I'm like, okay, so now I got to get 12 guys in, the whole deal. But we get in, we go to the show, which is great. But at the end of the show, Snoop says, hey, come back to the bus. And I bring Marshawn back to the bus. And again, I just met him for the first time going into the show. So he
Yeah.
doesn't know me at all. He gets in the show, he does his thing, he has fun, the whole nine. And at the end of the show, we reconvene. I said, okay, let's go on the bus and meet Snoop. So we go on the bus and we're hanging out with Snoop. And, Marshawn's 19 years old,
Yeah.
doesn't know me from Adam. Okay. And I'll never forget, Snoop then tells him, he says, listen, this white guy here, you can trust him. He's family. This
Mm.
guy's my family. And that kind of dawned on Marshawn, like, got it. Okay. And then from there, I kept recruiting him, the next 3 or 4 months. But that was the first interaction with Marshawn at the Snoop show on the bus after the show.
I love it. Now, for you, as is common, you don't start with a firm and kind of go your entire career with them. And so, after a while, you had transitioned firms that you're with, and luckily you did. You end up meeting CJ LaBoy, and I think it was you were recruiting maybe his brother. So, talk a little bit about you and CJ getting connected, and then the partnership that's come from that.
Yeah, so around 2001, the business kind of was changing where there's some bigger firms that were coming into play. And so Octagon was a big firm out of DC that was primarily tennis and golf and basketball. And then they ended up buying a football agency out here in Northern California, a guy named Mike Sullivan and Jeff Spurbeck, and they represented Ronnie a lot. So, of course, I knew Ronnie from back in the days when my cousins were playing. And I called Ronnie and said, hey, can you put me in touch with your guys? And he said, yeah. And so I met them, and I knew that the players at this point wanted more. It wasn't just a one-man show where
Yeah.
I was doing everything. They wanted more. And so I went to work for Octagon in 2001. I brought about 15 of my guys over from my own shop there in '01. And it was a great transition. But around that time, I got a call from CJ LaBoy agent. I mean, his brother Travis LaBoy's agent, who was at a different firm. He said, "Hey, will you hire Travis's brother as an intern?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. I'll meet him." So I meet him. I said, "Dude, this guy's great,"
Yeah.
and whatnot. So I hire CJ as my intern. And it kind of backfired on the other agent because 6 months later, I hired CJ full time. And of course, the brother wants to come over to the firm. So the agent
Absolutely.
calls me and he's like, dude, what's up, man? You just hired him as an intern. I go, you didn't hire him. I hired him. I wasn't planning to sign the brother, but why would he not sign with his own brother?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so CJ's been on board with me now since 2000, probably, 4 or 5, and been a great partner. So it's been fun.
I love that. Now, in the industry, I would imagine that if you're with a larger firm, there might be some agents inside the industry that are willing to, be a mentor, share with you some things that, hey, learn this or learn that. But I would also imagine there's quite a bit of kind of cutthroatness that happens. And it's like, hey, figure it out, man. Like, we're all trying to acquire our own, our own clients. So talk a little bit about, mentorship and, if there's anyone that really help mentor you, and then obviously your ability to help mentor CJ now.
Yeah, that's a great question. My mentor really early on was Bill Duffy. Bill Duffy is a legendary basketball agent who actually was my assistant high school basketball coach
Mm.
in high school,
Wow.
and and he didn't mentor me from a standpoint. I didn't ever work with Bill, but I was always going to go on the basketball side until I ended up in football. And Bill was always someone that I would call and meet with and talk to, even early on as a football agent. And so Bill was probably my first young mentor as a young agent for sure. And then as I got to Octagon, Mike Sullivan was there, a longtime vet in the business who's now retired. He helped me a great deal in terms of the contract stuff and the language and understanding the details of that. And then Ray Anderson, who's now he was the AD just recently at Arizona State. He was an agent for all the black football coaches: Tony Dungy, Dennis Green, Tyrone Willingham, all of them he had back in the day, and Marvin Lewis. And so those two guys really helped me in terms of a lot of the scope of the business and things. And so to your point, a lot of agencies, the bigger ones, are kind of cutthroat, eat what you kill, and you're kind of battling like you would think as like an investment banking firm or whatever. We've always tried to be like, let's bring the right guys in and mentor them to help them grow. Okay. So when CJ came in, it was like, no, I'm going to help him grow because at some point, you evolve in this business as a young agent, you are more of a friend to the players.
Yeah.
And then as you get older, you're still kind of a friend, but you don't really know the business that well. And then you get older, you know it, but then you can't really have the relationship you did with the players back when you were 23, 24.
Yeah.
So you always want an influx of young talent that can come in and help them grow and lead and give them their own book of business, but also work with you on your guys too. So we've always done a good job of mentoring the young kids that come in, and that's why I'm very particular about who I want to bring in because I want guys to come in and be with me for a while. I don't want people coming in for a year and leaving. I
Yep.
want young guys who'll come in, they're going to hustle, grind, get after it, and I'm going to help them grow and lead. But I'm going to give them a long rope. I'm going to say, listen, go meet Marshawn, go do this with them. I'm not going to hover around them. I want to let them grow and develop, which is something I've always learned about.
Now, to that point, just from a business aspect, I think hiring great talent is one of the hardest things to get right. And to your point earlier, you're looking for someone that's willing to fail or, well, we won't say fail, but just not succeed, right? Over and over and over and still be excited and enthusiastic about the opportunity at hand. So are there specific things that, over the course of your career, you've really learned to, ask or talk about that has helped you, find maybe that resilient gene before it's just a hire and then shoot 6 months in, you're like, what the heck? Who did I hire?
No, totally. And look, I think this business it's different because you meet anybody in the street. I want to be a sports
Yeah,
agent. I want to do
absolutely.
what you do. I love sports. I know
Yeah.
sports. I'm passionate about sports. I played sports. Everybody's wants to be an agent, right?
Yeah.
I always say my wife loves bringing me to cocktail parties because no one wants to. Everyone wants to talk to me
Yeah.
about sports, and she can kind of do her own thing.
Yeah.
But it's a 24/7 grind.
Right.
Business is not, you don't put the phone away on weekends.
Yep.
You miss kids stuff. You might miss Thanksgiving. You miss different things. It's a tough business, man. And so I always look for kids that, you know, that have had kind of a path where it's not like, hey, I went to Stanford and I went to Yale.
Yep.
I want some guys with some grit. I want some battle. I want some guys. Maybe they went to JC for 2 years and then they went and played somewhere and they scrapped through and they did side hustles like I did. I want guys that have the ability to adapt and figure things out and size things up and be able to go into any environment, whether it be the inner city or the country, and relate to kids and have them want to be around them. I want to see those guys that maybe, like through events or parties in college that figured things out, that it was the guys that knew the community and knew how to market themselves and all that. Those are the guys I want. I don't want the guys that, I went to this school and I did this and I got my master's. Great. That means nothing
Yep.
because you don't hand someone a client. You have to go get the client. And
Hmm.
so a lot of people think, well, who gets your clients? I do.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
gotten every one of my
Right.
clients. No one's handed me a client. You know what I mean? So as
Yep.
an agent, you have to not only know the technical side of things, but you also have to relate to the kids and go get the kids. You know what
Yep.
I mean? And believe it or not, there's very few people that can really do that successfully.
Yep.
I've been doing this for 30 years, Phil, and I'm still one of the top agents in this game, probably top 10 for 30 years.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. And I would say not just me, but there's the same people every year.
Yep.
Okay. You might get some new people come in. I get it. They're going to come in and make some things happen. But you don't see a lot of people coming in that really get it and understand the grind and can get it done.
Yeah, I love that. Now, just being in such a relationship business, I would imagine, things like, hey, I want to have a dad or an uncle or a brother, be my agent happens frequently. But then I'm sure there are times where all of a sudden next contracts are coming around and, the person realizes, oh no, like, my family just might not be equipped to take care of me, or the family friend might not be the best shop anymore. And then, there's an opportunity for a guy like you to come in and say, hey, here's my expertise. But how do you kind of bridge that gap in the relationship when maybe someone's had an agent previously and you're kind of coming in, hoping to, better serve them than what they've had up to this point?
Well, it's funny. I'm dealing with that right now. I have a kid that is contemplating coming over to me as a client right now, and he likes his agent. His agent's a young guy and whatnot, and apparently he's a good guy. I don't know him, but I told the player, I said, listen, I go, he might be a great guy, he might be a good guy. I said, but you're about to go into free agency, and you have a situation where you have one shot at this thing,
Yeah.
and if you've never been there, you've never done it, and you do not have the relationships with general managers or owners or head coaches, you're going to walk into a gunfight with a small knife. Okay. I go, I can pick up my phone and get a hold of any single GM owner within 5 minutes to get them on the phone. If your agent cannot do that, then they are not serving you correctly, and
Yep.
you are going to be losing this game. Okay. This is a relationship business. And unless you've been in dogfights with teams and owners, and coaches, you don't have these relationships. You can't just develop them quickly. You have to be in battles and you have to know them. And so what a good agent will be able to do is get information. Okay. If you don't have the ability to meet with every team at the combine, and get information on a player, then that player is going to lose value, and they're going to be behind at some point. So I told him, I said, listen, I get it. You might be a great guy, but what do you want out of your life? This is not about him. It's about you. And unfortunately, I've been there before. I've had players before when I was a young agent, and they say, hey, listen, man, you've just never done big contracts, and I'm going to go with this guy. I get it. It sucks.
Yeah.
It sucks. But it's life. It is what it is. And so I would just tell players this, listen, you need someone that understands this business, can dot the I's, cross the T's, understand the can get people on the phone and sell you as a player and get you the right contract. And so most guys believe that is the case, and they'll want that, and that's the most important thing.
Well, and so something that I thought was really, interesting that you've made comments on, and no, uh, not going to throw any team specifically under the bus, but as you've done it as long as you've had, you really understand the organizations and how they're willing to pay with guaranteed money or bonuses and when bonuses are paid. And once again, to me, someone that's not in the industry, it's like, well, isn't it a contract, a contract, a contract? And you go, well, no, this franchise will pay one way, but this franchise might bonus a different way. And I can only imagine that that expertise is so invaluable when you're actually in the contract negotiations.
No question. Like you look at basketball, and basketball, you have the different levels of contracts where they're all guaranteed to a certain level. You play 3 years, you might get this, or 5 years, and there's really no expertise in these contracts. If you're a max player, a super max player, there's nothing to negotiate. It's like
Yep.
you're getting $300 million no matter what.
Right.
Football is technical. You got to know the value. You got to know the team, and every team's different. So if you see players signing $50 million deals in football, that $50 million might be completely different over 10 different teams.
Yep.
Okay. What's in the contract? How the guaranteed money is set up? What's the cash flow? Are there rolling guarantees or skill guarantees? Are there roster bonuses? Are there incentives? What's the language in case something happens to the player? There's so many technical things in football that a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah.
And so you have to know as a player when you're negotiating with a team or even in free agency, hey, why this deal might be different than other deals. A player might want to go to one team. I might say, okay, well, that money's not the same, and here's why.
Yeah.
Here's what these teams do. Steelers and the Packers notoriously have not done guaranteed money for their players. And so their contracts are set up differently than other teams. And so as an agent, you have to know who you're dealing with. You have to know the concept of what they've done. And you're not going to reinvent the wheel. Like in Seattle, they've always done things one way. And I've had Marshawn there and I've had Michael Bennett and I've been in dogfights, but they're not going to change something. And so to a point where you can't tell a kid, hey, let's hold out to get this if they've never done it. You're not going to win that fight. So you have to know what you're going against. But all the contracts in football are different, and you got to have a good landscape as far as the knowledge base of what you're doing.
I love it. Now, in contracts and money, you mentioned representing Marshawn Lynch, and he has the infamous "I'm just here so I don't get fined" quote. And you had to go through the whole deal with the NFL commissioner in that situation. So, talk a little bit about the behind the scenes leading up to that and the phone call and
Yeah,
letters.
no, it was a stressful week. I mean, all year. I mean, so Marshawn, I can't remember what time of the year it was. He stopped talking to the media,
Yeah.
and so when you do that, you're obligated to talk after games, especially if you're a big time player. If you're some minor player, you're not getting asked to media. No one knows about it. But if you're Marshawn and the team's rolling, you're winning on 9, 10 games, and it's not, and now you're not talking. You have a lot of the pro football writers that will essentially report you to the league.
Yeah.
And so usually you get a warning letter, and then you might get a second warning letter, and then the third one might say, okay, if you don't talk, you're going to get a fine of this. And so we had a lot of those throughout the year, and then you'd appeal them, and so you'd get the fine, and then you'd appeal it, and so this kept on going. So going into the Super Bowl, we had about $1 million in fines that were accumulating. Okay. And now we get to media day, and I got a call from Goodell and Adolfo Bird. She was the right hand guy for Goodell back then. And they said, we got to meet with you and Marshawn because media day is coming up. And if you don't talk at media day, we are going to impose these fines of $1 million. And I'm like, oh my God. So this is in Arizona. It's probably it's Monday. And, Marshawn's in game week, and I got to call Marshawn and say, look, we got to meet the whole deal. So I get Marshawn, I get the PR guy from the Seattle, and we get it all together, and we have a meeting with Goodell and everybody, and they're like, listen, you have to be available to meet. You can't not talk. You can't not show up, or otherwise we'll have these fines. And so then it came to be where they told Marshawn that you have to be available. You don't have to say anything. You could say one thing. You just be available to show up. And so Marshawn, that clicked in his mind. Okay, well, all right, I don't have to talk and give answers. And they said no, you just got to be there. So Marshawn said, okay, I'm good. I'll be there. I'm not going to get fined, because Marshawn was never one to give his money back. He's like, I'm not paying someone money back. No chance. He was always great with his money, still is. And so I knew he wasn't going to go through and just pay and lose $1 million. So he shows up to media day, and I didn't know what he's going to do. So I'm actually running around Arizona doing something, and all of a sudden my phone's buzzing. Did you hear what Marshawn did? I said no, and that was the infamous "I'm just here so I won't get fined." And he
Yeah.
kept saying that over and over and over again. And it was a genius move. He didn't plan it. It wasn't planned. He just went there, and that's what he did, because that's what he said. I'm just here so I won't get fined. And he didn't want to pay the $1 million. And that was kind of the start of, Marshawn and the brand he's built today, which is pretty amazing.
Absolutely. Now, as you mentioned earlier, the game has changed a little bit. Where back in the day, you're kind of just showing up, hoping to spot the talent. And today, it's a really competitive market, right? I mean, everyone is pretty much aware of the talent at a very early age. And so, it's not every once in a while you'll find a diamond in the rough. And I won't say this was a diamond in the rough, but you had to look a little bit harder when you went to Eastern Michigan to uh, get Max Crosby. So talk a bit about, hey, Eastern Michigan, it's not Michigan, it's not Ohio State, right? It's not Alabama. It's a little bit off the beaten path, but what you saw there and then kind of the story of bringing him on.
Well, it's funny. CJ laughs at me because I don't watch football in terms of college guys. I never played football, so I never played football. I've never put pads on, and I can't literally just sit there and watch a player and say, "Oh, this guy's going to be a good player." Like
Yeah.
I've never done that. And CJ always laughs. He's like, "Well, you've never even watched a game." I said, "You're right," because what I'll do is I'll get information from teams and I'll say, "Give me the guys that you think are good,"
Mm.
and I'll recruit based upon that. Meaning, I'll go to 25 GMs. Say, "Give me your top live before the season starts in college or whatever it may be, and all that. But CJ actually saw Max on tape, and then we got some reports from other teams about Max, about this guy looked like kind of a young Ted Hendricks or Howie Long or just a Jared Allen type, DN motor, the whole deal. And then we went out and saw him and met him, and just long arms and tall and lanky, and had the mindset to be great. And that was what sold us and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, he technically was. You don't often see a guy who was a fourth pound pick become probably one of the highest paid players in the league. It doesn't normally happen. Those guys usually first round picks, top 10 picks. So you don't see a lot of Max Crosby's.
Yeah.
But what we saw in him was the talent, the upside, but more importantly, the mental side, knowing that this kid wanted to be special and he was going to
Yeah.
grind and battle and he wanted to be great. No one's going to outwork him. And that's what we saw back then. And 5 years later, look what he's done. It's pretty amazing.
Now, that's the difficult thing about sports, right? Is you can have a guy with all the talent in the world, but if the mental side or the off the field side is difficult, man, you get the tragic stories. And I know one person that you had represented was Alden Smith, and just a different story, right? I mean, it could have had similar, career aspirations and goals, but just didn't end up that way. So talk a little about the other side, right? When not every athlete that you sign ends up having, the skills, the talent, and the mental, the off-field, stuff that can get them to where they want to go.
Yeah, it's tough, and that's one of the biggest regrets I have as an agent. Not regrets, but you lose sleep over the fact that the guys that are on the cusp and have the ability to, it's not all about money, but like when you make a lot of money, then things can become easier in life.
Yeah.
And so I've had a lot of players that have fell astray to things, and it set him back. And Alden was one in particular. I mean, he was on the verge of getting $100 million contract with the Niners, and things kind of went sideways and whatnot. And to his credit, he battled back and went back and got back with the Raiders and did his thing. But it was just look, a lot of players have demons, and sometimes it's hard to get rid of the demons. At some certain points in their life when they're young and whatnot. Everybody looks at these guys as young players and say, well, how come they couldn't get together? They did this, they did this. Look, you go to any investment banker, a lawyer, a doctor at a young age and give them money and this and that, shit's going to happen. It's all not going to be, great. They're all just not going to buy houses and put money in 401ks and, do the right thing. There's stuff that's going to go sideways along the way. So unfortunately, Alden has some stuff that set him back. And, I've had other clients the same thing. So that's but you try to be there for them. You guide them. You put everything into them to try to fix it. And some things you can't fix. And that's the hard part of an agent, because it is a relationship business, okay? And you think you can fix it and you want to fix it, but there's some things you can't do, but you have to put everything into it to attempt to do it. So when you can never look back and say I didn't give it my all and try to help this person get there and all that.
Yeah. Now, to that point, I think that's one thing that probably has changed a lot for you from day one with Johnny to today. Back when you only have one or two clients, you got all the time in the world to cater to just about every need. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you represent 20, 30, 40 players. Well, I can't, show up to each Sunday game, right? I can't be at each significant event in your life. So talk a little about, scaling for you and not losing that personal feel, but also realizing, hey, I represent more than five people.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I said earlier about your age and the time in this business,
Yeah.
because when you're younger, it is more relationship driven at that age, because that's all you have to sell. When
Yep.
you're 25, you've never done big things, so you're selling. I'm here for you 24/7. I'm your guy. We're going to go out, do all the different things at that age. I think as you get older, like I am now in the business, you got to scale it with good young people. So, for example, I always believe that you want to put two or three or four people around each player.
Mm.
And so if you look at a player, like Max, Max is young. He's got me. He's got CJ. He's got two or three people that are involved in his life that are doing things for him. So you're right. You can't do it all and wear every hat. And nor would you want to, because a lot of agents want to hover around these players and they want to say, I'm doing it all because I don't want anybody else near them in case something happens or a client or employee leaves. they could take a player. We've heard the stories, Jerry Maguire. You've heard
Yeah.
these things over years, right?
Yep.
I've never believed in that because I've always believed in that if I do my job, my relationship, no player is going to leave me for someone who's going to leave me as a employee, whatever. But I want to make sure that they have the best of everything. So
Mm.
you have the best people around them in their life that work with me that are going to give them everything.
Yeah.
And as long as I'm taking care of that and I'm taking care of my employees, then all good. But you want to surround themselves with a little bit of the young, the old, the experience, whatever it may be,
Yeah.
to make sure they have what they need. And a lot of players really utilize that. A lot of players like Cam Jordan, he wants to know the marketing people. He wants to know the PR people. He wants to know the philanthropy people. He wants to know Casey Wasserman, who's my boss, the legal people. He's very, very involved. And that's the benefit of being a bigger firm because you're able to scale this with a lot of people to help these players out in their lives. Because back in the day, it wasn't that way. It was a one-man show. And now these players, there's more out there for them, and we got to give it to them.
I love it. Now, speaking of more out there, today I'm honored to have you as one third of your podcast on, but you have a podcast with Marshawn and then Gavin Newsom. So, talk a little bit about what the impetus behind that was and the name of the show and what you guys talk about.
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, so Gavin Newsom's my closest friend. I've known him since he played baseball at Santa Clara when I was playing baseball at San Jose State,
Okay.
and we played against each other back in those days in some fall ball leagues, and then early on when I moved to San Francisco, we became good friends when we were single days in the '90s, and then he's gotten to know Marshawn over the days very well too through things, and helped him out with Goodell on some matters and things like that. So Gavin and I have been best friends, and he's known Marshawn. So Gavin called me one time, it was like midnight, probably a year ago, and said, "Hey man, I got a great idea." I said, "What?" He said, "Let's do a podcast." I said, "What do you mean a podcast?" "Yeah, me, you, and Marshawn. It'd be great." I said, "Huh?" And so I said, "Okay, call me tomorrow." So he calls me the next day and says, "No, this would be really cool if he and I and you did a podcast. Like who walks in a bar, the agent, the governor, and beast mode." And I said, "Okay." So I called Marshawn. He's like, "Come on, man. Are you serious?" I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "All right, I'm all in." And so then it was just one of those things where we decided to kind of do it. And now we're probably half year into it, and we've had a blast. I love it. And politicking really kind of came from Marshawn, the name, because Marshawn's like, in the hood, we politic. We politic around life, sports, business, girls, whatever it may be, we politic. And so we wanted to kind of say, politicking with no politics. And of
Yeah.
course, there's some politics involved, of course. Um, but the name came from Marshawn, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been very unique. And I think people that listen hear different perspectives from obviously, seeing a different side of the governor than people see him maybe at a press conference. And they see how real Marshawn is, of course, and everything he does. And then you get some perspective from me as well. I'll say I'm the Ernie Johnson, and I got Shaq to my left, and I got Barkley to my right. But it's been a lot of fun. So it's a good side hustle to my day job.
I love it. And then, kind of last, talk a little bit about your decision to join Wasserman and your role there that you're doing now.
So when I was working at the firm before Wasserman, I wanted to work with Eugene Parker.
Yeah.
Eugene Parker was a legend in the business, represented I think 12 Hall of Fame players, from Emmett Smith to Dion to Curtis Martin, you name it, he had them. And Eugene died unexpectedly within like a year, had cancer. And so he died, and then one of our basketball agents back then, Dan Fagan, died in a car crash.
Wow.
And so we had a lot of things happen. And so my contract with that firm, my old firm, ended in about a year. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to stay there. And so I was either going to go on my own, for my last sunset or
Yeah.
my last ride. But I've always known Casey Wasserman. I've known of him from the business. There's nobody more connected than him
Hmm.
in the sports business landscape. And at the time, he didn't have football. He had one agent, which was Andrew Luck's uncle,
Yeah.
and they had Andrew Luck. That's all they had because Casey was looking to buy an NFL team, and so Casey and I got connected, and he said, "Listen, I've been looking for the right guy to lead the football practice." And then we talked over a period of maybe 2 weeks. That was it. and he said, "You're my guy." And then he bought my business to CJ back in 17, and the rest is history. So it's a great company, great people, uh, top of the line sports in every division from golf to hockey, and it's been a great run. So excited to be here, and this is my last ride, of course, for a long time. But I've seen it all in 30 years, Phil, and looking forward to 10, 15 more.
I love it. Well, Doug, I want to say thanks so much for being on today. You and I could do this for hours, and I'd love to have you back on, share more of your story. But thanks so much for just sharing some of the pivotal moments that have led to where you're at, and excited to watch your journey.
Appreciate it, Phil. Thanks for having me, and congrats on your show as well.